Hello again. I am Gedalia Meyer, teaching for RootSource, Israeli Jews teaching Christians worldwide. And this is lesson 5 of a continuing lecture series entitled Images of God, Names of God, in which we explore many different images of God that Jews have had through the long ages of Judaism. And what we mean by images of God is different ways Jews have had of understanding, of perceiving of what God actually is. We've been using the Torah, the primary document of the Jews, as our first source in understanding these images, and we have been using the particular names of God that are listed in the Torah, which there are several, as described in a previous lesson. Up till now, we have been focusing on one particular name of God, the name Elohim, which is the first name of God mentioned in the Torah, and it's the name of God used throughout the creation narrative. And we have explored various images that have come out of this name Elohim: the image of God as the creator, the image of God as the force of nature, the image of God as the one who speaks and changes creation, the image of God as the maker who makes man and tinkers with man until the final product is made and works with man to complete that final product. Today we are going to be exploring another image of this name Elohim, which is the idea of God resting. So that's why the title is, "And God Rested on the Seventh Day." So let's get right to those verses that deal with God resting. So here are the verses. These are the verses that come, the 3 verses that come at the end of the creation narrative. They are not in chapter 1 of Genesis. They are actually in chapter 2, but they are considered part of the creation narrative because they talk about the end of the creation period. And right after this starts sort of a new phase in the biblical narrative. So here's the first verse. Vayechulu hashamayim v'haaretz v'chol tzava'am. There it is translated into English. And here's the translation. And the heavens and the earth and all of their hosts were completed. I just want to point out that traditional Jews recite this verse and the next 2 verses, these 3 verses, when they say the blessing of Kiddush, of sanctification, of Shabbat, of the 7th day, on Friday evening. To usher in the Shabbat, these are the 3 verses that are used, the first verses in the Kiddush recital. So here they are, and the heavens and the earth and all of their hosts were completed. No name of God, not even any time period, no mention of the Shabbat day, of the 7th day, simply a statement that everything was completed. So we have to go to the next verse to see the name of God here and what happens and when it happens. Vayachal Elohim bayom hashvi'i malachto asher asa. Vayishbot bayom hashvi'i mikol malachto asher asa. Here's the transliteration, and there you see the name of God right there, which is right there. And the translation of this verse is, and God finished on the 7th day the work that he did, and God rested, and he rested on the 7th day from all the work that he did. So this verse is a very interesting verse. Among other things, it doesn't say that God actually did any work on the 7th day. It simply says that God finished on the 7th day, and it also says God rested on the 7th day. There are 2 questions that get asked by primary rabbinic sources that are quite ancient on this particular verse. And the 2 questions are the following. One is the general idea of why is it that God needs to rest. God, of course, is not a human being, not flesh and blood that needs to relax and need to regain energy and take a day off. God has none of those issues, and God can simply keep on going without having to regain any energy. So why does God have to rest? What is so great and important and divine about resting? That's one question. The second question is, it says God finished on the 7th day, which implies that God did work on the 7th day. But then it says God rested on the 7th day, which implies that God did not do work on the 7th day. This is a question that traditional Jews have asked for up to 2,000 years. And because of this question, a very interesting incident that happened way back in Jewish history took place. Now, this incident was the first time, as far as anybody knows, the Torah was translated into a language other than Hebrew. This was a request from the Greek-Egyptian king who went by the title of Ptolemy, and that perhaps was his name. And this particular Ptolemy, about 2,200 years ago, requested of Jewish scholars that they translate the entire Torah for his famous library, which was in the city of Alexandria. So when these scholars were ushered into certain rooms and translated the entire Torah, they deliberately mistranslated certain words. So what does it mean to deliberately mistranslate something? They took the Hebrew words and put them into this ancient Greek that they were translating into, and translated it into words that did not mean what the Hebrew meant. This is one of them. Instead of saying, and God finished on the seventh day, they translated the word into Greek to read, and God finished on the sixth day. Because these Jewish scholars were afraid that the Greeks, who did not understand the nuances of Hebrew that the Bible is written in, would not be able to understand the idea of God finishing on the seventh day. They would misunderstand that to mean God was still doing work, the work of creation on the seventh day, which Judaism is not actually true. So they translated it as that God finished on the sixth day. But in Hebrew it says God finished on the seventh day. So this has to be understood. If God's not doing work, none of the work of creation is taking place on the seventh day, then what is God finishing on the seventh day? How could this possibly be true? This is a famous question that Jews have given various answers to over the millennia. And we have to see what at least one of these answers to get an answer to this question. What is God doing on that seventh day? Is God simply resting? And is that a form of work? That seems impossible. So let's go to the next verse. The next verse is Vayvarech Elohim et Yom HaShvi'i Vaykadesh Oto Kivo Shovat Mikol Malakto Asher Bara Elohim Lasot. There is the transliteration. We can see the name Elohim coming up here, and there it is in transliteration. So there is the name of God. And what does this verse mean? And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, for on it he rested from all his work that God created to do. So here we have the idea of God blessing and sanctifying the seventh day. Now I just want to point out that on none of the other 6 days of creation does God bless or sanctify the day. It does talk about God blessing individual creations. God blesses the animals, and God also blesses human beings so that they should be able to be fruitful and multiply. But no individual day is blessed. The days are described as good, and the sixth day is described as very good, but none of them receive God's blessing, and none of them are sanctified. Only the seventh day. And why is that? So the Torah says, for on it he rested from all his work that God created to do. This seems to imply that because God was able to rest from his work, that's why the seventh day received God's blessing and sanctification. Resting warrants blessing and sanctification. This needs to be understood. Why is this so? So we're going to go to a second set of verses that come up later in the Torah. They come up in the book of Exodus, chapter 31. 2 verses here, and these verses are recited as part of the Kiddush, the sanctification of Yom Shabbat, on Shabbat morning. These are the verses that introduce that Kiddush. So here they are. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et Shabbat la'asot et Shabbat l'dorotam brit olam. There it is transliterated. And the children of Israel shall keep the Shabbat, to make the Shabbat an everlasting covenant for all generations. No mention of God's name here. Simply the commandment that the Jews have to keep the Shabbat as an everlasting covenant. The next verse clarifies things a little bit. It says, Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael oti leolam, ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et haaretz uvayom hashvi'i shavat v'yinafash. Here's the transliteration of that verse, and I want to point out that this word right here, which is right here in English, and it's pronounced in English as you see it right here, this is the famous 4-letter name of God, which Jews pronounce as Adonai in the course of blessings and when reciting the Torah. and in other circumstances generally pronounce it as the word Hashem, which is a very well-known word in certain circles. Hashem means simply the name, which is what this is. This is considered to be the actual name of God, which we will be hearing about again and again in coming lessons. But for right now, since we're really focusing on the Shabbat, just leave it as this is another name of God, which is discussed as in association with Shabbat. Here is the translation of those verses. Between me and the children of Israel it shall be an everlasting covenant, because in 6 days Hashem made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he stopped and was refreshed. So there we have it. This is the reason why the children of Israel have to keep the Shabbat, and it's a covenant between God and the children of Israel, because in 6 days Hashem, God, made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he stopped and was refreshed. So there's the word Shabbat, which is translated as stopped, and the word Vayinafash has various translations. You look in the various translations of the Torah, you'll see this translated a half a dozen different ways. This is one of the more common translations, and was refreshed. God was refreshed, indicating that God needed a breather. God needed, the word Vayinafash is from the Hebrew word nephesh, which means something to do with the word breath. God needed a breather. God needed to relax. A very strange idea. So it's generally understood as the following. The concept of rest was the creation on the seventh day. Rest itself is a creation, and even God, it could be said, needs to rest because God needs to be refreshed. Perhaps the explanation of this is the following, that creation is an activity. It's making something new. It's changing things. It's keeping things running, whatever it might be. Resting is the idea of letting things be. And this is what was introduced on the seventh day. God let things be. Everything was completed, and all God had to do from here on in, as far as the creation process, was let things be. Letting things be, as we all know, is not such an easy thing. We all want to tinker with something and make it better and change it and put our little 2 cents in there. And it's pretty difficult to sort of sit back and say, okay, this is the way it is. So this is precisely what God did on the seventh day. God let things be. By God doing that, letting things be, it says here that God was refreshed. God gained a certain amount of energy because God was able to sort of stand back and say, okay, it is completed. I'm now going to let things run to whatever degree they do on their own. Of course, God would be there the whole way running things and sticking God's influence in at various times and places. But the general idea was creation itself was completed, and God was now able to rest and let it be and be refreshed by that. God is a being who creates and makes and brings forth and is the force of nature, but God also lets things be and is refreshed from that. Perhaps this is why Bnei Yisrael have to keep the Shabbat. So Bnei Yisrael and other people who want to enjoy the spirit and the blessing and the holiness of Shabbat gain this idea of we have to be able to let things be. It's not always upon us to change things and make them the way we want them to be. We gain the refreshment, the energy of letting things be the way they are. With that, we are going to let things be and call it another week. Until next week, I am signing out for Root Source. I am always happy to hear from you. Please contact me at any time at this email. I love to interact with my students. Have a nice day and a nice week.